Hello, adventurers, and welcome again to another installment in my Legend of Kelemantura series. Uh, Last time I talked about the Council of Mentura. This is a lore. This is a lore dump. For anyone who's really interested or wants to run a campaign in the world. I don't know if people out there actually are interested in that, but if someone is, by all means, this is still frozen. But if somebody is, work away, and this is also for my players as well. It's useful to have something other than a book or a wall of text to read and go through. So last time I talked about the Council of Mentura, the sort of geography, culture, bit of history, recent history, and I mentioned the war between the Council and the Salazan Dynasty. Now, I'll get something more concrete sorted out and written down for the Salazan Dynasty, and I'll do that in the next installment. But for now, I'm going to talk a bit more about the war between the Council of Mentura and the Salazan Dynasty. Set about 25 years prior to the current adventure. Again, but currently, about 25 years ago, there was peace. There was a relative peace existed between all the nations. There hadn't been any real conflict for a long time. But at this time, an exploratory party was sent out by the council, after a scholar, had uncovered some documentation that talked about a long lost colony for the Pure Ones on islands to the southeast. Now, the islands, they were uncharted. Their rough location was known, but they weren't exactly charted. They hadn't been exactly charted. So the expedition was more of a case of, let's find these islands and accurately chart them. And two, let's see if there's anything actually on the island. So exploratory party sets out. Maybe 30 people in total. So mostly scholars, researchers, a couple of priests, clerics, and a few soldiers just for muscle. Nothing too intimidating, nothing too serious. But this party set forth, and after a while found the islands, not entirely difficult, and began the process of more accurately charting them. While the charting process was ongoing, another party set about exploring the islands, and relatively soon found that yes, there was in fact a colony here, or the remains of one. It was long overgrown and fell mostly to ruin, but there was in fact a colony there. Colony that worshipped. There was no flags or anything to know that this was the Council of Mentura, but it was a colony of worshippers of the Pure Ones. So, needless to say, the exploratory party was delighted and sent word back immediately to the council that, oh yes, we found the colony. Sent back some work, some notes. The council was delighted that, oh, we found a colony, excellent. And the council rather brazenly decided that because this colony was there and it was the Pure Ones, and the council are big into the Pure Ones, they decided, well, that's now our piece of land. We own that land. And sent a lot more men and material forward, and what was initially an exploratory party, a research party, if you will, of maybe 20 to 30 people, and a research outpost, very quickly became a military outpost. The Menturian ships arrived, woodland was felled, fortresses built, docks built. This didn't happen overnight, but it happened over the period of weeks and months. Of course, things move a bit faster with magic, but very quickly this became an established military outpost. And this did not go unnoticed by the other nearby power, the Salazan Dynasty. Again, I'll go into more details on them later on. But they took exception to this outpost purely and primarily because it was, well, the outpost was very close to very close to their trade routes. And to be honest, from a tactical standpoint, it basically meant that any traffic, any ships that were headed to or from the Dynasty could very easily have been intercepted or harassed from this military outpost. So the Dynasty, quite rightly, took offense at this. Said, no, that's not going to happen. And they sent emissaries out to this island to basically have a conversation and go, hey, not cool. This is kind of, this isn't very, can we talk, please? Because we're not comfortable with this being here. And very quickly, the Menturians on the island, took the wrong end of the stick and chased them away. Said, fuck off, this is ours. A few blows were exchanged, but no serious offense taken. Salazan retreated and sent back a war party. Go, right, you want to play that game? Right. Raised it to the ground. And this colony, they basically overran it and said, no, okay, you want to do it? This is ours now. Took over. That was it. Some on the research party survived. Some members did manage to survive and escape and send word back to Mentura and returned and told them what happened. At this point, the council and the Dynasty and the council were talking to each other, because by this point things had happened and they had been talking to each other. No agreement was reached. No agreement could be come to. No peace terms or anything. So war was declared. Not quietly, but war was declared. They couldn't come to any agreement. Neither side would admit fault. This is council claimed that because the colony was there, they had the right to the land. The Salazan says, well, that's as maybe, but we were attacked and we acted in self-defense. Back and forth, no one pointing fingers at each other. War was declared. When the council reached the decision to go to war, they rather arrogantly assumed that a declaration of war would be enough. Because the council have a very powerful, if I talked about my previous video, they have a very powerful military. Very powerful infantry forces. And they thought that no one's going to try and tangle with us. We're fine, we're sweet. And hesitated to go into a war footing, i.e. recruitment drives, materiel, men, weapons, that sort of a gearing up for war. They're very slow and hesitant to do so. And only did so after ships of the Salazan dynasty blockaded 2 of their ports. I tried to blockade a 3rd port for the military capital of Terran along the same coast, but being the military capital, was a bit better defended. It was a lot better defended and was able to repulse the blockade. So at that point, serious war kicked off. That was basically it. At that point, we are at war. So at that point, war started properly. Initially, the dynasty, because they were already on the war footing, gained some ground, and they managed to make small incursions, some small landings along the coast, and threatened Vesta and Kivik and some of the outlying towns, Vesta being the trade city to the south and Kivik being the port city to the east, and a few smaller settlements nearby. Did a bit of harassing, but not really anything significant in terms of tactical advantage or gaining a significant foothold. Because while the Menturians were slow to start, once they got going, they were not easily stopped. As I said, they have a very powerful, well-organized military and a vast landmass to draw people into from the armies, for the armies. So, the first few months, Salazan made some advances, but couldn't really win. They couldn't take Terran, they couldn't take Kivik. They contested Vesta, and Vesta was fought over and exchanged hands a couple of times. Because it being a trade city, it wasn't really set up to be defensible. It was more of an open plan sprawl, whereas Terran and Kivik were more defined ports. So there was defenses in place, so they could be held and were held. So Kivik was retaken. Vesta exchanged hands a few times, and then when the council got going, drove the Dynasty Salazan completely out of Mentura, back across the sea, retook the colony, and landed on the shores of Pangaea, which is the continent the Salazan dynasty rules over. I'm looking at my notes here. I realised I don't actually have too much written about this. Here we go. Recent history. There we go. What I'm saying right now, I'm considering as canon. I'm adding to this. There we go. So yeah, at this point, war had been started, and then the council drove them back. There's a third party in all of this, which is the Republic of Ambarino, which is another power to the far west. They remained, or tried to remain, neutral in this. They didn't aid militarily in anything. But they did send men, materiel, and aid to both the council and the dynasty. They didn't take sides, but they supplied both sides. And did it pretty evenly. So neither side could really say that the Republic favoured one or the other, so they just stayed out of it. Kept to themselves as best they could. So when the council arrived in Pangaea, they arrived at right, established beachheads, and quite quickly made some footholds. Again, their better trained, more organized military was able to advance, seized a few ports, seized a port, a few outlying villages, and were able to secure some beachheads and actually establish a significant pocket of, no, this is our land, we own it. Set up, and we're able to go, yeah, okay, we have a little nugget here, a little foothold, this is going to be our base. Set down, dug in, defends themselves, set up their forts, set up their temples, basically made themselves at home. Dynasty tried to repulse them and failed. And the dynasty kept sending occasional missions across to try to take... There's a fly buzzing. I don't know if that's been picked up or not, but there's a fly buzzing on my window. To try and take Vesta again. It's the only place that had any real success. And Vesta did fall and was taken back. It fell, then it was taken back, fell, was taken back. And for the entirety of the war, Vesta basically was a tennis ball, if you will, between the dynasty and the council, just back and forth, constantly back and forth. And this led to the establishment in Mentura of Port Mur. It's another port, but it's on the western seaboard. So it could be reached by Ambarino, but not easily reached by the dynasty. If you tried to reach it, you have to go further around, and that would enter into the Republic's waters, and that would make the Salazan dynasty aggressors towards Ambarino. So it's a Port Mur was established. So the council could still be resupplied from Ambarino, and then the far side, the other side of the globe, if you will, Ambarino and the dynasty were able to link up and supply each other. But when the council arrived on Pangaea, established their beachheads, established their footholds, says, right, we've got a toehold, let's advance. And they went further inland and took a few towns. And after a week or two, after a few days, took some more towns. Took another town, and then the army started to slow and struggle, because while the army did have very good military and very good infantry, they relied heavily on magic. Now in Kelemantura, in my world, magic stems from the gods, from the pure ones, or the scourge. And the way that works is worship of the gods creates hotspots of magic, if you will. So worship of the gods creates hotspots, and also from the Purge, which is the great battle between the Scourge and the Pure Ones. The Scourge was driven out of Kelemantura and the Pure Ones took over. There were several big battles. Think kind of along the lines of the Calamity from Critical Role. These examples I'm just using. So there was pockmarks and scars left in various parts of the planet where these are intense pockets of divine energy. And it's from these areas that are constantly refueled, that are sort of sources of power, but they're refueled and recharged by worship and basically by worship and the Pure Ones constantly sending down more of their power. It's kind of warlocky, if you will, if that makes sense, but not. So it's, think of it like an endless, like a pool, like a battery that's constantly being recharged, and magic users are able to draw from this. And the council relied on their magic heavily for combat, for healing, for building. They relied on it for an awful lot, and they very quickly realized, or learned quite quickly, that the Salazan dynasty was primarily an atheist society. They didn't worship the Pure Ones. So their magic began to run out. Not only their magic started to run out, and they could no longer draw on the power from the gods to recharge. So, well, yes, they were able to gain some ground once their magic ran out, and their clerics, their paladins, these wizards could no longer cast and could no longer defend the troops, the infantry. The Salazan dynasty drove them back, because the Salazan dynasty rely on technology. They're a more technologically advanced society. Think, if you want to think about, if they're sort of late Renaissance, the late medieval period, where you have firearms, where historically for us it didn't really happen. This is a later edition, but you have the beginnings of like steam power and electricity. That's where the Salazan dynasty is. The council had none of that. So the Salazan were able to use their technology and their knowledge of the very harsh landscape to push the council back, and drove the council back into their foothold and sort of held them there. And over time, the council made more attempts to break out and retake old ground, and they made some small advances over the years, but nothing really noteworthy, and quite quickly settled into a war of attrition, both on Pangaea and also back home, because as I mentioned, Vesta was traded back and forth many, many times, and the less defensible towns along the coast, the eastern coast, the southern, eastern, and even the northeastern coast were just traded back and forth, and a lot of blood shed for not very much. So the two powers fighting themselves into a stalemate for nothing. And this went on and war continued basically in this way for a good 5 years or so. Now, towards the end, the Salazan dynasty had made significant advances in their firearm technology, because nothing advances technology like a war. So their firearms technology had advanced. They had improved their army's mobility and supply, and their navy had been better supplied and better mobilized. And then the council had also figured out how to recharge how to recharge their magics in the field. So they were able to sort of make more ground and hold ground and establish more beachheads. And the dynasty were able to then sort of take more and more of the council of Mentura. So there was a bit of a stalemate, and things started to pick up again. Think sort of World War One, if you will. This is like 1917, 1918, when tanks started to become a thing and the tide started to turn. But think of it for both sides. So they both started to gain ground, and but again, very slow. And it looked like at that point that the war was going to go on, but it was going to be a war of attrition for God knows how much longer. So, seeking an end to the conflict, the council gathered a party of their finest, their best and brightest, their warriors, adventurers, the most skilled individuals that they could get their hands on, and gave them a daring and told them and assigned them a mission to end the war by any means necessary. Their means to end the war were to teleport into the city of Tarok, the capital city of the Salazan dynasty. They were able to access the city by teleport in, fight their way through some of the defenses, entered the palace of the dynasty, and kidnapped the Empress May Salazan, who was an older dwarven female, kidnapped her and brought her back to Terran. So, within the space of a day, the war was immediately brought to a ceasefire and a halt, as the Empress was captured, if you will, by the enemy. And the dynasty were just, oh shit. Suddenly, the dynasty had a significant loss. Around the same time, the dynasty were threatening more major cities. Terran had been threatened, had been harassed for years, had been sieged for years. But the dynasty were finally making a breakthrough. So Terran, at this point, was also the council's. It could have been lost. Terran was very nearly lost by this point, just for years of bombardment and sieges, taking its toll, and the city was about to fall. So Terran became a hostage for the dynasty, and the Empress was a hostage for the council. And the two agreed to ceasefire talks, so they arranged to meet up within the Republic of Amoreno at a neutral location. They both met up, sat down, discussed, and came to peace agreements. So after 5 or 6 years, the war was brought to a peaceful end, settled by diplomats and politicians around a table, and agreements signed to share in technologies, to share in magical powers for healing, for restoration, to try to ease the wounds of the war, to try and sort of basically forgive each other, pay each other back for the years of fighting in some way. And peace was established at that point. But it was noted after the war, during the discussions, a few members of the council and the dynasty, not major players, but some more minor players from the diplomatic parties that were sent over, noted that the Republic had thrived during the war. The Republic wasn't known for being a poor, desolate place, but the war had definitely lined the pockets of some of the more industrial-minded members of the Republic, and that had been noted. And a few low-level accusations of profiteering were levelled, but nothing really came of it. But the accusations were made, and money had been made, and peace had been established. Lessons learned from the war. Peace reigns. And now, around 20 years later, our story continues. That same peace is still there. The Republic is still as wealthy as ever. The Council is still as powerful as ever. The Dynasty has continued to manufacture ever more powerful and inventive weapons and methods of moving men around the place. So, well, let's hope peace holds. So, until next time, adventurers,